Marshal is currently developing regulations to implement both of our bills and soon should be hiring additional positions to inspect and regulate pipelines. We will hear from the acting state fire marshal about the decision to restart the pipeline and what more can be done to improve pipeline safety. We will also hear from the Crimson Pipeline. Due to the ongoing investigation and possible criminal and civil court cases that may come out of the incident, we may not get all of the answers to all of our questions today. However, this committee will follow up with the responsible party, local, state, and federal agencies to get answers to our questions. I am extremely concerned about oil pipelines harming our coast, our neighborhoods, and our watersheds, and we will do everything that I can do to ensure that we have the toughest rules to prevent oil spills and protect our communities. Senator Jackson.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I wish it were because we were all fascinated by the fascinating artwork that's in the room and not because of our concern about what seems to be a continuing theme of devastation and degradation of our beautiful community and our neighborhoods and our backyards. We did as Assemblymember Williams mentioned, we've been here before, at least in terms of having to address an oil spill. The most recent one prior to this was, of course, on the Refugio coast, which sent tar balls down here to Ventura, so you were also directly impacted. And this is a spill that was, of course, on land and has impacted a number of neighborhoods, and actually it turns out very good friends of mine. So it means on a number of levels. As your state senator, I'm honored to represent all of Santa Barbara County, and then Western Ventura County goes, the district goes through Camarillo and up to the top of the Conejo grade. But I have been was a longtime property owner in the city of Ventura and feel very much a kinship with the community, this community that feels very strongly about the need to be good stewards and the importance of protecting our environment and our resources, which are part of the reason that we live here and part of our commitment, frankly, to making the future better for our children and grandchildren. Now, although the oil spill at Refugio was the impetus for the creation of my select committee on the Refugio oil spill, today we are sort of moving along, and today my select committee turns its attention to the Grove incident with a particular focus on whether any of the applicable lessons we should have learned from the Refugio spill were applied to the Grove incident and what more we need to do going forward, both to prevent this kind of thing from happening, to address it as quickly as we can if it does, and to try to make sure that we do not have future incidents such as this, so that when we do come back to Bell Arts, we are truly here to enjoy the artwork and not to try to deal with a problem that shouldn't exist in the first place. So, as Assemblymember Williams mentioned, we both authored pipeline safety bills last year that were crafted from the obvious failings in the Refugio Line 901. These measures were signed by the governor. They're going to make pipelining in California safer, but we can't stop there. And it is incumbent upon us to continue to make pipelining in California as safe as possible. Now, it's really undisputed that pipelining is the safest method of transporting oil. It's safer than barges or trains or cars that appear on our highways and near our highways and our communities. But that doesn't mean that we should just simply accept pipelining. It has to be as safe as possible. And of course, anyone who knows me and knows my colleague, Assemblymember Williams, we truly wish that we weren't using fossil fuels at all. It is so important that we wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. You know, I believe in that little adage that says, if you don't drill, you can't spill. And I think that that is important. And one day I hope that we will see using entirely renewable energy sources as the future and as the present. Right now, though, we're not there yet and continue to rely on fossil fuels for energy. But as long as we do use oil, we need to use it in the safest way possible. So with that, I want to thank all our panelists for being here today to testify, and you in the audience to make sure there's an exclamation mark on the fact that we do care, and we care deeply about what happens to our community, and that we are all responsible stewards, and that we want to make sure that those who benefit from our environment, who benefit financially, do everything possible to make sure that our environment is protected in the process. So with that, I'll hand the mic back to Assemblymember Williams, and we'll get started.
I'd like to call up our first three panelists, Mike Richwine, who is the acting state fire marshal, which regulates oil intra-state pipelines. Thomas Cullen, the administrator from the what's called OSPRA, the Office of Spill Prevention and Response, and David Ndaya, the fire chief for the city of Ventura. And please, if you have any seats next to you, even if they say reserved at this point, please raise your hand, because I know there's a lot of people who are standing in the back, and we want to afford you an opportunity to be able to sit down, even though it's a packed house. So if you could keep your hands up if there's a seat next to you, some people could sit down. I'm sure not everybody wants to stand in the back. Mr. Richwine, please outline in 8 minutes your presentation, and we'll save some time for questions.
Thank you, Assemblymember Williams and Senator Jackson, for the opportunity to be here before you to talk about this important topic. I have prepared some remarks to provide some background on our pipeline safety program, to update you on the status of our investigation, and to also update you on the implementation of SB 295 and AB 864, and answer your questions, of course, regarding this incident. In 1981, the legislature established the Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Safety Act with the intent that the Office of State Fire Marshal shall exercise exclusive safety, regulatory, and enforcement authority over intrastate hazardous liquid pipelines. Our office currently regulates approximately 6,300 miles of hazardous liquid pipelines through a Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, certification. The certification provides inspection and enforcement responsibility with respect to facilities that are jurisdictional to the state. We may and have adopted additional or more stringent standards for intrastate pipeline facilities, provided the standards are compatible with federal regulation. I'd like to point out that interstate pipelines are defined as a pipeline or a part of a pipeline that's used in the transportation of hazardous liquids for commerce. The State Fire Marshal is responsible, and interstate pipelines are under the jurisdiction of PHMSA. The State Fire Marshal is responsible for intrastate pipelines, and those are defined as a pipeline or part of a pipeline that's not an interstate pipeline, that is located entirely within the state borders or offshore state waters. Our Pipeline Safety Division consists of engineers, analytical staff, and clerical support staff, and we have offices located throughout California, primarily in proximate location to where the pipelines occur. And we inspect the pipeline operators to ensure compliance with federal and state pipeline safety laws and regulations. An operator is required to conduct testing and inspections. Testing includes integrity management, activities such as pressure testing, inline inspections, or smart pigging, verifying the adequacy of cathodic protection against corrosion, and also they're required to inspect their pipeline components such as valves, right-of-ways, and markers. Our pipeline safety engineers conduct inspections of witnessing pipeline testing, the physical on-site inspections of pipelines and/or control rooms, and it also includes a complete records review. We are also responsible for the investigation of pipeline spills, ruptures, or fires, or even damage caused by external forces such as excavation. On the morning of June 23rd, Cal OES notified our office of a crude oil release in Ventura's Hall Canyon. This became known as the Grove Incident. The release originated from Crimson Pipeline's 10-inch Ventura crude oil intrastate pipeline. Over 1,000 barrels of crude oil is estimated to have been released into the Hall Canyon from the area around vault number 7002. The oil traveled approximately a quarter of a mile from the release point. We dispatched pipeline safety engineers to the site to begin an investigation on the cause of the release. Our investigation is still ongoing, and that kind of hinders our ability to share with you more information on our investigation. But we are able to share with you some background related to the release, along with current focus of our investigation. On June 22nd, the day before the release, a Crimson Pipeline third-party contractor completed the replacement of valves number 7002 and 7002A on their Ventura crude oil pipeline. On June 23rd, shortly after crews began refilling the pipeline, oil was seen flowing out of valve vault number 7002. Crimson was notified and shut down the pipeline. Our field investigation included gathering field measurements and overseeing tests on the pipe and their components related to the release, but focused primarily around the valve vault number 7002. Crimson Pipeline submitted the project execution plan, which is a return to service plan, for our review and input during a planning meeting on June 27th. And Crimson Pipeline used this document on a daily basis during their failure analysis evaluations. Our pipeline safety engineers remained on site to monitor the process and conducted visual inspections of each of the valves to verify that they were leak-free and operational. Crimson Pipeline continued to follow this plan until the pipeline was put back into active service on July 1st. Our current investigation efforts are focused on gathering documents, document retrieval, records review, and the continuing interviewing of witnesses. Our investigation findings will include the root cause of the release, and we have recently received the test analysis of the valve and the components in the area of valve number 7002. We will also identify probable violations of pipeline safety laws and regulations, and they may include subsequent penalties and corrective actions. We estimate it could be 4 months before the investigation is complete. However, we don't know where the investigation will lead, and we don't want to rush the investigation. I would like to take a moment to update you on the status of Senate Bill 295 and AB 864. Our staff is in the process of developing regulations for the implementation of these new laws. Our office has formed informal work groups consisting of industry representatives, non-governmental organizations, emergency responders, and other agencies that regulate the environment and pipelines. These work groups are assisting us in defining the terms and drafting the implementation language for the regulations. Senate Bill 295, authored by Senator Jackson, requires annual inspections that will provide additional scrutiny and verification of the integrity of hazardous liquid pipelines, especially in sensitive coastal zones. The regulations have been submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for review, and the 45-day public comment period has opened today, and we anticipate that we will be able to adopt these regulations by January 1st, 2017. AB 864, Assemblymember Williams, will require pipelines in environmentally sensitive areas of the coastal zones to have the best available technology, leak detection, and automatic or remote shutoff valves and shutoff systems in new pipelines beginning in 2018 and retroactively fitted by the year 2020. Our office is facilitating the work group meetings for the regulations development of these measures, and we anticipate having these regulations adopted by July 1 of 2017. Our office is adding 13 additional pipeline safety engineers to carry out these new inspection and construction inspection requirements, and we believe these two bills will strengthen the ability of the Pipeline Safety Division to enforce the requirements designed to minimize spills from hazardous liquid pipelines and provide greater protections for the public and the environment. Thank you again for the opportunity to be before you on this committee.
We'll have Senator Jackson start on questions for this speaker.
First of all, I want to thank you and appreciate the fact that you are, the State Fire Marshal is moving quickly to put into place these regulations. My concern is that we're seeing more and more of these spills. And the question, the sort of the overarching question I'd like to ask you before honing down into a couple more specific areas is, with the fact that we are trying to expand the drilling so that we can drill more, be more energy independent, I think is the colloquialism that we use, that the infrastructure, the pipelining, the pipelines that we have are aging. And as I understand, the crude oil that is being transferred through tends to be particularly viscous, so that the chemicals that we then use to try to thin it out so that it will flow more smoothly tend to be quite corrosive. Is that a correct analysis of what we're seeing today throughout the state of California? Is an aging infrastructure and more corrosive chemicals being used to transport this kind of rougher crude oil? And if that is true, what can we do to address this failing infrastructure and be hopefully more successful in keeping these spills from happening in the future?
Thank you, Senator Jackson. I think our leak analysis will show that it is cyclical regarding the number of leaks that occur. We go through a period of we have relatively few leaks, and then we have periods where we seem to have more leaks. I think that the measures that the two of you have sponsored will give us the ability to have the additional personnel and the additional inspection frequency so that we can be on top of these pipeline operators to ensure that they're doing the testing that's required, that will be able to discover weaknesses in wall thicknesses or corrosive buildups in their pipelines and take appropriate action to correct it before it spills or leaks.
And with that in mind, when we do the testing, and in the testing in this case, when was this pipeline last inspected, and were the results provided to you, or who has those results?
The Crimson Pipeline last had an inline inspection in July of 2015, and part of our investigation is the review of those inline inspection results.
Who did the inspection?
Do you mean the inline inspection?
Yes.
We require third-party operators to witness that, but the operator is the one who does the actual testing using inline tools or pigs.
Pigs, I think.
And then one of the requirements that we have here in California is that we require that to be verified by a third-party body that we have certified.
So do we know that that was in fact done?
Yes, that was done.
By a third party? And so it's my understanding that the company does inserts the pig, and I forget what that stands for. It just rotates. It's a rotating
It's a sensing
mechanism.
device.
It senses and provides information as to what the level is of thickness in the pipe, or if there are any obstructions and so forth. This was done by the company itself, but then confirmed by a third party. Does the third party simply sign off, or do they witness it, or how would they make sure that the data was accurate and that the procedures that were used were appropriate and best, the best available kinds of methodologies?
I'd like to refer to one of my engineers for that question, but we certify these third-party companies to witness these tests to ensure that they're done according to the standards and according to our regulations. And then we review the results of those tests. And then we discuss that with the operators. But the operators are still the ones who are responsible for the testing and the maintenance.
So is that part of your investigation to make sure that the third party didn't just sign off sort of kind of a pro forma?
Well, in this particular case, we believe the leak originated around the valve vault, but that would be a standard practice to make sure that all of the reports were properly reviewed and that the testing was done in accordance with the regulations.
So from what you say and what it sounds like, the valve itself was replaced the day before. Is it a fair conclusion that it probably wasn't properly inserted?
I can't comment on that because we are still going through the review of the analysis of that and the investigation's still ongoing.
Well, let's just assume hypothetically that that is the problem. What is, do we have, are you prepared and capable within the framework of your responsibilities to make sure that when there are adjustments made, whether it's a valve or whether it's any other measuring device, not just the pipe itself, that we can assure that the procedures used are going to be effective, or should we be concerned every time a company replaces a valve that could lead to a spill?
Well, I think that the measures that you and Assemblymember Williams have passed, that will provide us with additional staffing and additional regulatory authority, we will have the ability to stay on top of those types of valve replacement and components. But ultimately, it's the operator's responsibility. I can say that as I mentioned in my remarks, that the spill originated in an area around valve 7002, and so we are focusing our efforts in that area.
Okay, and just to get to the fact we had the spill, efforts were made to correct that problem with the valve. What procedures were Crimson required, or was Crimson required to perform prior to restarting that pipeline?
Crimson has responsibilities under Title 49, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 195. The pipeline operators are required to write and follow procedures for analyzing pipeline accidents to determine their causes, and they must report accidents that are greater than 5 gallons, involve personal injury or fatalities, property loss greater than $50,000. And so they're required to do the proper reporting, and they're also required to fill out an accident investigation form with Fed DOT. And then in that form, they have to list what they believe is the apparent cause of the accident and what may be contributing causes or secondary causes to the accident as well. That is submitted to PHMSA, and then PHMSA submits those reports to us for verification and review. And then ultimately, in the investigation of an accident, the operator, the government code requires the operator to make available to the state fire marshal all records and information that in any way pertain to the accident, and they shall afford all reasonable assistance in the investigation that is ongoing.
So I guess the bottom line question is, who gives them the okay to flip the switch back on? And what is the basis of the determination that it's okay to start up the pipeline again? What was it in this case?
Well, in this case, they submitted a plan. It's the startup plan, for lack of a better term. And the startup plan is reviewed by our office to ensure that they have done all the proper testing and maintenance. Well, they have a plan to do all the proper testing and maintenance. And then after we review the plan to make sure the plan is complete and we are satisfied that it will not lead to further leaks, then we okay them to implement the plan. We stay on site and we monitor that they do the repairs correctly. We take into evidence any components or pieces of pipeline that we need. But then after they have satisfied all of the requirements, including a pressure test, and they have passed the pressure test that we witness, then we give them the okay to start the pipeline back up.
And is there any requirement that they advise the public that they have restarted their pipelining?
You know, I'm not familiar with what Crimson's requirements are. Our practice has been to notify the emergency responders of the local fire department.
Do you know, if I may just kind of go a little bit out of order, either of the two other witnesses here, if you could answer that question, was the public notified? Is it your responsibility to do that, or nobody's? I mean, this is I'd like to know, because we might have to tighten up the laws a bit, assuming that there is no requirement that the public be notified. Obviously, they care deeply enough to take a Thursday afternoon to be here. Were they notified, and if so, is there a requirement that they be notified?
Senator Jackson and Assemblymember Williams, I'll take that question from the local agency. Ventura City and the Ventura City Fire Department obviously have no regulatory or legal authority over the cleanup, the incident, starting the pipeline back up, and actually weren't even part of the unified commander operations a week into this. But what we did receive was a phone call to an on-duty battalion chief that was commanding the city of Ventura fire stations, who was notified in what he received as a courtesy call that said a plan's been submitted and the line may be restarted.
Do we know who made the call? Was it the company? Was
His
it the
understanding was that
state?
it was from the state, that it was from the state fire marshal.
So
and
you,
We made that call, Senator.
and is that part of your requirement that you do that? And was that your understanding that that was the notification necessary to the public?
That has been our practice, to notify the emergency response community that the pipeline was coming back on.
So we took that phone call, and essentially the battalion chief took it as an informational courtesy call, since we, again, had no regulatory authority and were not involved in unified command a week into this incident. So he notified, we're dispatched regionally by the county fire department runs our dispatch center. That's about their involvement with this statement. And so he did a common practice, which is he called the dispatch center, and some of us received a text message basically relaying some information. If I can go into a small amount of detail, it was the same vehicle that we received information on. There's been a car crash in the city. An engine is heading north to Monterey to assist at a large brush fire, something of that nature. It's a notification, it's an information update, if you will. As an agency that had no regulatory authority, my battalion chief had absolutely no prudent reason to believe that was the sole and only notification that was going to be the official vector by which to notify the community. He notified his command staff, and we took the information. In the incident command system, and I will refer back to our actions on the day of the spill, we had many public information officers assigned to our incident that were part of our command in the first 12 hours of this incident when it was still an emergency response. Not one piece of information leaves the PIO office at the command post that day without being cleared by the incident commander, making sure it's accurate and representing what's truly happening to make sure the public is properly and openly informed. Given that that's our normal practice in working with multiple agencies all the time, we absolutely, in my opinion, had no authority to release any information at that point because we were not part of unified command, and we were not a PIO for the incident, and we had no reason to believe that the PIOs in unified command didn't have the same information. And I believe what you've stated is true, that what's come down over the last month or so is that was apparently the intent of the state, that was the only and the public notification that had to be made prior to the restart.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'd like to go back to Mr. Richwine. The one thing that I think logically people wonder about is if we do not yet know the cause of the spill, how do we know that it is an adequate restart plan?
Without divulging too much of the investigation, I think we could say that we had a reasonable assurance of the cause and the fix for that, and that when that fix was completed, the line would be intact. It was recently tested a year ago, and so all of these were factored into the startup plan, and we felt comfortable that, in addition to that, our pipeline engineers were there to monitor when the line was restarted, so that we could immediately shut the line down if there was any additional problem. But we felt comfortable that the operator had done what they needed to do to fix the problem, and after a pressure test that we witnessed and they passed, we were willing to restart the line.
And I guess the bigger picture concern that I have is that we have increasingly seen facilities because the infrastructure is aging and maybe under price pressures, their staffing is extremely low. Rincon Island was just, for instance, shut down because of the safety concern and thank you for your role in that, because of the safety concern of inadequate staffing and an infrastructure that had rusted to the point of not being even able to make controlling elements at Rincon Island. This pipeline was first installed in the 1940s. Do you have concerns that we could see and should fear more breakdowns from either the aging infrastructure or from inadequate or unskilled staffing that could lead to more incidences of human error?
Unfortunately, Assemblymember Williams, I do not have an opinion on that. I'm not prepared to answer that question without having the ability to research some data and do a trend analysis, and so unfortunately I don't have that data with me today. Be happy for us to do that research and get that information to you.
And I think from this exchange with the local fire department, I think it would be interesting to just look at the question of your system of notifying the local fire department that it's ready to restart seems to operate when that fire department is part of the incident command. But we now see the kind of the problem when they're not part of the incident command because they don't feel like they know enough about the operations to be able to then put out information to the public when they weren't involved in it. And so perhaps what we should be looking at is what do we do when a department is not involved in the incident command, and how do we treat it differently when it is not involved in the incident command? Because obviously what this is, you guys feel like, well, our local notification is to let the local fire department know, but the local fire department doesn't know anything about the incident because they weren't part of the incident command, so they don't feel qualified to be sharing that information with the public. With that, I'd ask Mr. Tom Cullen, the administrator of OSPRA, to make your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Senator Jackson. I really appreciate the invitation to join you this afternoon and to meet all of you concerned community members. I want to speak a little bit with some slides about the conduct of the response. And before I get into the slide deck, I just want to acknowledge some of the very hardworking folks from Fish and Wildlife, the Office of Spill Prevention Response, that have been here since day one, rotating through the incident commanders, filling roles of public information liaison, environmental unit, and putting in some very, very long hours in the conduct of the response. Some of what I'm going to say is redundant. You've already heard it already, but I'll go through some of the details of the spill. Next slide, please. So it was the early morning, June 23rd. I was getting into my car about 6:45, and Assistant Chief Paul Hamilton in the back there gave me a call and told me there was a report of a major pipeline release down in Ventura. And immediately we get into mobilization mode. The question from me was, okay, who's down there, who can get there? I'm on my way. Let's activate. By the way, we have an emergency response center. We call it the Operations Support Center at K Street in Sacramento that looks a lot like a command post down here. It has all the functions of operations planning, logistics, legal, scientific, so forth. And we start kind of monitoring and running a response while our other folks mobilize and get to the scene. You heard the numbers of the estimate that was released, about 1,075 barrels, or about 45,000 gallons of crude oil, about 650 yards of the Hall Creek down in the Prince Barranca area. Challenges, of course, were the incredibly steep terrain, and it was in the middle of a heavy residential neighborhood. I'll go to the next slide. This is one of the first things we saw when we started pulling up local coverage. If you could click on the arrow. This was quite a shock to us, certainly. We don't normally see crude oil flowing like this. I immediately asked, is this B-roll footage from some other spill? Is this water mixed with oil? The assurances from the news station was, no, this was taken that morning. When our first responder, one of our environmental scientists, arrived there, she reported that it wasn't flowing like this anymore, that it had now steadied into pools of oil, and thank goodness, due to the quick response of local fire and I think one of the first oil spill response organizations, we call them OSPRAs, they had an earthen dam constructed at the entrance to the underground structure for the storm drainage. The oil never got close to that, but kudos to them for having the foresight and following plans to further protect waters, especially the ocean. We'll go to the next slide. Before I get to what you're seeing here, I want to refresh for some of your memories, and unfortunately we're so soon after Refugio that a lot of this will be a repeat, but what's a unified command? We bring together a federal representative called the Federal On-Scene Coordinator, a state representative from my office, and typically it's one of the wardens as a state on-scene coordinator, and the responsible party. Why the responsible party? Isn't that like the fox guarding the hen house? They bring the resources. They're required by law to have the financial backing, and be on contract with an OSPRA, the Oil Spill Response Organization, have a plan for protecting and rehabilitating harmed wildlife, and their strategies specific to up and down the coast based on the type of pollutant and the terrain and sensitive sites on what to do. So local fire was first on scene. We're going to be hearing a little bit more about air monitoring. That's one of the first things they do for their own safety, first responder safety, but also in this residential area, what are the concerns? Should there be evacuations? The mandate for a unified command comes both from federal and state statutes. Many of you are familiar with the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, Open 90. That's on the federal side, and we have something similar we call Lempert-Keene-C-Strand. That's the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 that created our office. We follow something called the National Incident Management System. Some call it ICS for Incident Command System, and I kind of look at that as kind of the Rosetta Stone, if you will, of emergency response. Everybody comes together and we're now speaking a common language. In organization, there's standardized forms. Everybody knows what an ICS 201 or 207 or these different forms are. And you follow a certain rhythm. They call it the planning P. The stem of the P is the first couple of hours of the response, getting mobilized, getting on scene, coming together, and quickly putting on colored vests that signify what your roles are, and then you follow the loop of the P for each operational period. Typically, the first operational period might be about 24 hours because a lot of things are happening and changing, and I think right now we might be in a 14-day operational period, somewhere around there, because it's more stable and the plan is going well. So there was a lot of visible pooled oil, as I mentioned, a strong smell, particularly at the site of the valve box and then deep in the ravine. Within a couple of hours, there were 2 vacuum trucks already taking suction, with hoses going down to the oil. At the end of that day, the next morning, I think there were additional 3 trucks, and the end of the next day, a total of 10 vacuum trucks. We talked about air monitoring, and you'll hear more about that. And the progress of the spill went fairly well for the response for those early hours. Following the vacuum, my understanding is there's about 1 to 2 feet of soil that was excavated and removed to about, I understand there's about 40 of these 20-yard bins of contaminated soil that have been removed. Within 2 weeks, most of this visible oil is gone. It's down to hand scrubbing of individual rocks, and that's kind of what's going on right now. I have a couple more slides that kind of show before and afters. Let's go to the next one. This one's taken in exactly the same spot. You can tell by the branch over the ravine there. You can see the pooled oil with a lot of vegetation on the side. That's on day 2 of the response. And then about a month later, you can see how it's all dry. There's some sunshade in the background where they're doing some of the work on scrubbing of the rocks. What else this picture shows, though, is that vegetation had to be removed as part of the the cleanup. And therein lies another problem, because now you're creating an instability with some of the geographic features. That's a hazard to the folks that are down there, and it's also a hazard to the property owners that are right there. Next slide, please. So I came down and met with Supervisor Bennett on the morning of the 22nd, and then I went down to the site to see for myself. So these are some of the pictures I took. The top left picture shows right next to the valve box is there on the lower right, and you can see where the oil went down and how it has been cleaned up at that point. Next picture is looking down, and you can see some of the work that's being done down at the steep ravine. Next slide, please. There's the access going down. Many of you, of course, have seen this yourselves. And this is at the rock scrubbing stage, in July. Next, please. Now I want to talk a little bit about the outreach. So we broke down some of the efforts that we made in communications to face-to-face with residents, meeting with government at the local, state, county levels, a broader meeting like a community forum, and then push out to social media. What I take away as the administrator from this is that the purple meeting bar that shows up on the 30th is way too far removed from the response. I take that, and I promise you that we're going to do better with getting face-to-face with concerned property owners, with concerned community, able to now answer questions. I heard things of, well, we didn't have the answers ready in time. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's the answer that needs to be shared. But we're on it. We're going to let you know as soon as we can, the answer to your question. And the next slide shows more of the same going through the month of July of some of the communications efforts. The next slide shows, this is where we went door to door with adjoining property owners, and if we rang a door and didn't get an answer, we left an information packet with numbers to contact, information on what's going on with the spill. You can see the track, that's 650 yards, that brown line of where it came and tracked through the ravine, and further down would be the entrance to the storm drain system. Particular note, we're very grateful that there were residents along Grove Lane that actually allowed staging equipment and access down through their property. We know it's disruptive. There's a lot disruptive. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of traffic going through. But we're very grateful for the support that we got from these folks that were affected by the spill. Next slide. Air monitoring, of course, a concern. The first thing when we saw, where this was are there evacuations? Who's there taking samples? And I know that Chief Ndai will be able to talk a little bit more about that. But we were assured, early in that no lower explosive limits were being reached. There were none of the BTEXs that they're called, or H2S that would affect the safety of the responders or the immediate public. But this shows samples that were taken, throughout that area, looking for any hazards to public health. And then next slide. Senator Jackson talked about what lessons did we learn from the Refugio spill, and two very different spills. I expect we're going to find out probably two very different causes. One, catastrophic effects to the coastline, with effects reaching south of Ventura, all the way down into to Manhattan Beach. But one of the things that we tried to do was, to keep the local community better informed, and there's still a long way to go. We recognize that. One of the things at Refugio that we learned and became very good at, we believe, is reaching out and engaging, tribal concerns. And with the work that you saw being done in some of those pictures, had tribal monitors there. I understand that some artifacts were recovered and archived and protected. And also, not as much for this, a lesson from Refugio, but we implemented here was how do we identify and report out impacted wildlife, and there was minimal wildlife impact here. Next slide. Some of the immediate lessons from the Grove incident. It always seems to come down to communications and a need for better communications, and we recognize that. the question about the reopening of the line, we didn't know in the Unified Command or in my office. And when I look at it for very simply, well, we probably, I understand why we didn't know. We don't regulate pipeline operations or safety, but certainly they're plugged in a Unified Command with folks there down in the ravine from where a spill had happened. We should have known. And I've talked with Chief Richwine, and we have an understanding that there needs to be better communication, and we're working toward that. We won't have a sign-off on a decision to reopen a line, but we should know, and the Unified Command should know. And the local government advisor, yeah, I almost didn't have it in my notes right here. The door is always open, and I will always welcome, and the Unified will always welcome, the participation of local government. It's essential to have them plugged in. We saw it at Casa Busan. It became a mandate in the San Francisco area. We saw it at Refugio with the county of Santa Barbara. And I'm pleased to say that we now have a rotation established with a local representative to be participating as a technical expert in the Unified Command here. And with that, I invite any questions you may have, ma'am. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. I do have a couple questions. One relating to the video that you showed. If crude oil is flowing that swiftly, it's my understanding that can only happen because of a few different reasons. One being that it's mixed with water. Two being that it's superheated to flow more rapidly through the pipeline, or that it is mixed with certain chemicals to flow more rapidly through the pipeline. Do you have the expertise on your team? Did you test why that could be the case? That crude oil was that liquefied to be free-flowing at that kind of...
I asked that same question, Mr. Williams, and I have no, I was told that there were not diluents or that the oil was heated. I don't have any test results that show that there were any additives to that oil.
Right. Well, we'll ask that question again.
Of course.
Your staff, from these two most recent incidences, you probably have had a good idea to be able to somewhat understand whether or not you have sufficient staff in this Santa Barbara and Ventura areas to, with oil spill expertise to cover our area. Can you tell me if that, is there sufficient staffing for these kinds of incidents?
I believe the answer is yes, because what we do is we flow in experts from throughout the state. We're a statewide agency, and many of the folks you see in the back of the room are actually detailed here from other parts of the state. And while we have folks throughout the state, I mentioned that one of our environmental scientists was at the scene shortly after 9 o'clock that morning. I don't view human resources being a limitation for our ability to respond.
And can you briefly sort of tell us what the methods of cleaning up the oil were, and were there cases that oil was mixed with water rather than scooped up and removed, and why does that take place?
Well, there was no water down there when the oil, entered the canyon. The specifics as far as what was done, when it was done, I would have to refer some notes or some of the experts in the back, but as I mentioned with the vacuum trucks, to initially get the oil that was pulled up and out, and then I believe that there were sorbents, meaning like a sponge-like, between pads and boom and things like that. And my experts in the back, if I'm saying anything that's off, correct me. And then I don't know what day they actually did do some flushing in a very controlled manner. We're now introducing water to move oil, to lift it up, to make it better, easier to recover. I know that there was I have it in my notes and I already closed the iPad. Several tens of thousands of liquid waste that were removed between oil and then perhaps the flush mix.
Great. And you mentioned the fact that the vegetation had to be removed and that could have impacts to local property owners. what will be done in terms of restoration of the area impacted by this?
Well, there's a claims process that's required for every responsible party to set up, and I know that they're going to be looking at, working with each of the community members on what needs to be done to make them right.
Senator Jackson?
Thank you. That brings me to the question. It indicated here that there were about 1,075 barrels, 45,000 gallons. To date, about, I think it's 19,000 gallons have been retrieved, leaving, gosh, I did the arithmetic a little earlier, but there's still over 20,000 gallons that have not been retrieved. And yet, is this cleaned up? I mean, what's happened to the other 20,000 gallons? And the question is, where are they, and how do you define clean?
Quantities are always remarkably difficult, Senator, and that's always the question, is where did the oil go? Some certainly evaporated, went to the air and out. What we're seeing down there is there's some a little bit that's down below the surface, and there's continuing to take samples, core samples, very methodically and carefully because of the stability issues. But it's going to be difficult, especially given this terrain, to get all of the oil. We recognize that. And so we're in the process now, as the Unified Command, at looking at what is the definition of clean, what are the endpoints that are going to be signed off, and all concerned parties are going to have a role in participating in that dialogue.
In fact, it's 25,008. I found my notes here. So there are 25,000 gallons out of the 45,000 that haven't been accounted for. Is that
Having been
right?
to the site, ma'am, and from what I'm hearing from our folks, and I hope that some of the residents would perhaps agree, I'd find it hard to believe that there's 25,000 gallons of oil remaining in the ravine right now.
Well, I guess, and it could seep through, which you mentioned. So there's a need, obviously, to core
Yeah.
to find out, is that coring being done, and
It
if
is.
so, by whom?
It is. There's a private contractor. I don't know the name of the firm that's doing it, but they've been there for I believe more than a week now, starting to do the studies, and it is ongoing.
Are you monitoring them to make sure that they are there?
The Unified Command is, yes.
Are you part of the Unified Command?
My representatives from my office, are there around the clock.
So the Unified Command is PHMSA, it's the responsible party, it's OSPRA, and who else is part of that?
So right now, the Unified Command, in the command role, is actually OSPRA and the responsible party. And now we have many others that are there present, filling various functions, to include the local government representative. US EPA will be coming in, as we approach the time to have the discussion about, signing off the response.
How could you assuage my anxiety if I were one of these property owners and there's 25,000 gallons of crude oil that is unaccounted for?
Following the plan that we're going, ma'am, with going down and digging and trying to see what's under the ground, and listening to their expert opinion there. We're not finding pools, big pools of oil under the ground right now, and they can only go so deep because there's, my understanding from just a briefing a couple of hours ago, large stones and cobble that you just can't physically go down any further.
So is there any kind of formula by which we know that oil, dissipates or evaporates? I mean, is there any system by which we could identify that maybe there, once the dissipation and evaporation occurs, that only be maybe 5,000 gallons that would be trying to clean up? And do you know of that, or is that a
I'm not
question
aware of
for
a
you?
hard set formula. We have some tested, algorithms for offshore on-water oil, but I need to go back and look at it more for oil and soil.
So
Maybe I could help out with one of the questions. I mean, in addition to the 10,000 of liquid that you cleaned up 40 20-yard bins of soil. So obviously some of that 25,000 is in that that contaminated
And they're
soil.
going to be going through and
How long
doing
does
analysis.
it take to determine how much of that is in that soil?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. There's going to be an analysis of those bins, taking samples from each one of them and then attempting to come up with a quantity from those.
So that's at least a way to start assuaging
Oh,
the
sure.
one's
And
concern.
you saw in the picture how many of those bins there are. There's 40 of these large, stored out there by the command post.
And who, to go back to the question of cleanup, who defines when this is clean?
Well, the Unified Command is going to come up with the cleanup document, which will be, then US EPA is going to come back in, and we're going to be talking individually by parcel with, owners to show them what the plan is and get their input and their concerns and walk the property, if you will, to show what's been done.
So let me end my last question with the first question that I had started with Mr. Richwine. And that is, your OSPRA, this is your job, oil response and cleanup. And you've been at this, I think, since June of 2012, so for
Yes,
the
ma'am.
past 4 years. Are we seeing more oil spills? In the oil spills we're seeing, is it because the pipelines are old, the infrastructure is aging, the type of materials being used to liquefy and thin, if you will, the oil so that it can move more rapidly through the pipelines? Is it causing erosion and corrosion of those lines? And is there any data being collected to try to ascertain whether or not we're seeing more spills and what we can and must be doing to try to prevent them going forward?
Statistically, looking at the number of spills over the last several years, and certainly in the span of time that I've been here, statistically there's not an increase in the number of spills.
That may or
It's-
may not be good news, depending upon
No,
how
I
many
know.
we've been having,
Well,
but-
yeah,
Yeah,
ma'am.
a lot of the reasons why it's not an increase is because there was an operator that a few years back that was having spills so
Regular.
often that, that surely skews the data, but go on, sorry.
But not just as an administrator, but as a concerned citizen myself, I think it's clear that we have an aging infrastructure in many areas of energy and transportation and so forth, and pipelines are one of them, and we're going to partner in the preventative side with the State Fire Marshal and with PHMSA to be better prepared, for when these things happen, to make sure that we call them the plan holders, those operators that have a requirement to have a oil spill contingency plan with my office and financial responsibility, that they're prepared for these things and, paying a very close attention to what our partners that are involved with pipeline inspections and concerns,
Well, I know we've tried to address this in our legislation, but
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just concerned because here we are less than a year later in the same general part of California seeing more of these spills. So I do hope that we're able to really take this very seriously. The impacts are really quite devastating to a community,
are.
as you can see. My last comment and question has to do with communication. This kind of thing happens, and it is a kind of a whack in the head to a community. It's the kind of thing that creates an amazing amount of concern and anxiety and anger. No, I don't think that there's any debate that most of the people in this room are a little bit upset about what happened. Also perhaps upset too because of a lack of communication. And I know we had this with the Refugio spill. But there were regular events, regular, almost daily public information reports and press conferences to try to let the public know what was happening and keep them informed. And to that end, one of my colleagues, Senator Ben Allen, had a measure that would have required OSPRA to add a communications element to the state's oil spill contingency plan in an effort to ensure that local communities were kept a regular basis informed about what was going on and have an ability to ask questions and have the media be able to also provide information to the communities what's happening. Unfortunately, the bill was claimed to have too much of a cost and was kept on what we call the suspense file because it had too much of a financial element to it. And I'm wondering, is this something that you would support, that OSPRA would support, a way to make sure that we have an ability to communicate with our local communities when these kinds of things happen? While we're trying to prevent them and limit them, but we know they do happen, we need to have better communication. Are you supportive of that effort?
We were never curtailed at all from communications, Senator. We were always there. I think looking back, what happened was that media interest tailed off fairly quickly in this. As a matter of fact, the first scheduled press conference at noon that day was very sparsely attended. It was off the front pages, outside of Ventura, off the screen, so to speak. And shame on us, shame on me for correlating that directly with community concern. We should have been down there with communications representatives and specialists from all of the state, local, responsible party, county, and established holding regular events with all of you, and responsive to the need for transparency and information. And I'm taking that back to do better.
All right, well, I appreciate it, and I know that you have, we have learned from the spills that we've had recently, and I appreciate you doing that. Of course, we have the internet. Perhaps, I'm assuming that there were daily reports that were coming out.
You saw the two calendar slides that there were reports all the time that were going, but we have to make ourselves more accessible. Those are push means of communications. We have to be responsive to the community pull.
Appreciate that.
Yes,
All right,
ma'am.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just, for the benefit of our next presenters and to a reminder of ourselves, our first two presentations have taken with questions an hour, and our next two presentations must take much less if we're to make sure there's adequate time for public comment. So with that, I will ask for the comments from David Ndaya, the fire chief of the great city of San Buenaventura.
Thank you very much, Senator Jackson and Assemblymember Williams. I would like to begin by thanking the residents that are here as well as the professionals. We are your community. We are your first responders. And since the very beginning, our actions have tried to be the best they could be in what's a difficult situation to provide you with the best emergency response we could, along with my colleagues here at the table. So thank you for being here. Very quickly before I get started, I'm going to chronicle a little bit about what we did as your first responders. When you hear me referring to Incident Command, or what I'm going to refer to as IC, that is completely separate from what we've heard already about Unified Command. I'll be speaking purely to the initial emergency response as we were trying to figure out what this was, the scope of the emergency, and how we were going to curtail it from a first responder viewpoint. And I'll end it with when I talk about how we transferred that command at around 7 p.m. the night of the 23rd to the unified command that we've talked about up to this point. Now, the morning of the 23rd, we were first notified of anything happening around 5:36 a.m., and we were dispatched a single engine company with 3 firefighters, a captain, an engineer, and a firefighter, to basically a hazard investigation. It was one call of the potential that someone thought there might be oil in a creek. And as you can imagine, that you don't expect to pull up with 3 firefighters and find what we found. Within a total of about 10 minutes from that first phone call, we had an engine on scene, someone, and again, not being the technical experts in oil spill response, but rather first responders, the first on scene captain realized this was far outside of their scope. Within about 10 minutes, we had additional crews, we had a battalion commander, and by about 5:50 a.m., we had already notified County Environmental Health, the OES Warning Center, which is a state-level warning center for any hazardous materials release, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Coast Guard, and we were on deck to notify the National Response Center, which is just a higher entity, same scope as the OES Warning Center. for the state. By 6 a.m., our hazmat team from the east end of town was en route. That's only 3 people. It's not a big team. It was 3 more people on a specialized piece of equipment that had a lot of our initial response equipment and monitoring, which I'll get to in just one second. Over about the next hour, we being the incident command, requested a lot of resources, many of whom are in the room right now. We have partner agencies, and we work every day with multiple agencies on single incidents. It's what we do. And through our partnerships, our automatic aid, our mutual aid, we had hazardous materials teams come in from Oxnard Fire, Ventura County Fire. And if you ever saw a photo of the command post down at the state beaches, the parking lot was half full by about 7:30 to 8 a.m. With all of our cooperating agencies, many of whom are represented here today. We did hold a press conference at noon that tried to grasp what we had. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, under the Fire Unified Command, the First Response Emergency Unified Command, we held that until about 7 o'clock. And around 7 p.m., as we stated through all of our acronyms, through NIMS and through ICS, we had a formal meeting with representatives from the responsible party, from the state, and we transferred command from our oversight to the oversight of the state and the responsible party for what we would call mitigation and cleanup. At which point, largely, the fire department and the city staff here became liaisons for you. And we stepped back, again, not having the authority, not having the technical expertise, but rather having the initial actions that we took, which we've covered, and I think which we already know occurred early that morning and into the day about identifying exactly what we had. Our initial priorities were obviously to protect life, property, and the environment. And that's a very broad brush, but at 5:36 a.m. when you roll up on a single engine, those are your priorities. And they always are, regardless of the emergency. Given our limited initial resources and reports initially of a potential release of up to 5,000 barrels of oil, this was from an on-site individual, and again, 6 a.m., my battalion chief is getting all the information he can as quickly as he can. That was a lot. And so our concern was that it would be more than just actually what the video showed, but rather a river that could make its way through our underground structure, our infrastructure under the city, literally under the city, and out to the ocean. So what we do is we usually plan ahead, much like we do in a brush fire, and we tried to get as far ahead of where this disaster could go and work backwards as quickly as we could, asking basically for the whole world to come in an emergency response type of phase. Our operational priorities were obviously to locate and, if possible, stop, if we know how, the threat. In this case, in oil release, we are not exactly experts in oil release, but we tried to identify where it was that it was coming from to start making all the right notifications and relay proper information both to the public, to our PIOs, to the incident command. The second was to stop the forward movement, which again lent to the earthen dam. And I certainly don't want to take any credit or thunder for the efforts that morning. That morning, there were people out in your city that work for your city. There were public works employees, there were water department employees, and when we put out the call, we literally said, basically, if you're a city employee, drive to Ventura High School. And the incident commander would rather have a large toolbox to work from than a small one, and I know that we utilized a lot of people there, whether it was notifications, reconnaissance, anything we could do to identify where this was and how far it was going. It was not just your fire department, it was your city that responded that morning, trying to do everything we could as well as we knew how to get out there. So I appreciate the efforts of all the city employees, not just the fire department. Basically a combination of our personnel, our training, our equipment, our preparation for emergencies, and our communications, because we do respond so often with outside agencies and other departments. It allowed for our successful and appointed response very early in the initial response phase of this incident. We, like I said, transitioned around 7 p.m. Unified Command over to the state and to the responsible party. If I could address very briefly some of the things that both Chief Richwine and Mr. Cullen have stated. From a local government advisory standpoint, we appreciate the extension of the invitation, and we have added what's called a local government advisor to the incident at this point. And I think, as we've discussed even before, and Mr. Cullen has said, we would have liked that role a little bit earlier in the process. But one thing that I do want to make sure is that our local government advisor is not actually a technical expert. Our local government advisor is there as a community advocate. And that local government advisor is there, still with no decision-making authority, with no actual authoritative oversight, but rather to be the eyes, the ears of the community to make sure that your interests are properly relayed, because by no fault of their own, we do have the pulse of this community, and our city staff does know who our people are and who our residents are and what they need to hear. And this isn't a large field on a ranch somewhere in Central California. This is a Ventura neighborhood with houses and backyards, and I think we've already talked about how important communication is early and often. Even if it's bad news, it's news versus not knowing. Monitoring, I'll address, I was asked by a couple people in the audience. We did not test the air that morning, we monitored the air that morning. And what that means is when we first pulled up on scene, our hazmat teams have monitors, our engine companies have, when I say monitors, there's one on each piece of equipment. And what we do normally is use those to test for ourselves carbon monoxide, things that explode, basically. Technically, it's called a volatile organic compound, or a VOC. We test it normally in small areas. If we're in a home that's just experienced a fire, we have to determine for our own sake and for regulations if we have to be wearing our air masks. So we'll have a firefighter go through the house, very pointed, very, very centralized, and say the carbon monoxide is low enough that you may now remove your mask per regulations, or nope, it's still too high, keep your mask on. Those were the monitors we used that morning to give it our best shot, to figure out if we had an explosive environment, if we had an issue where oxygen was being displaced by something. And we determined that morning that there was nothing immediately explosive or asphyxiating in the areas that we could put the few monitors that we had. And so we chose the locations the best we could, again, with what we had available. The two choices you have are to, in our vernacular and in common practice, is to evacuate or to shelter in place. And with closed doors, closed windows, and so forth. And at no point did we monitor anything within our capabilities that signified an evacuation, where there was an asphyxiant or oxygen was being displaced or anything was going to explode. The details to which the toxicologists are testing the air, I believe it's over 6,000 points now, or that we did not get to that depth, obviously, as your fire department. We did our initial, can we be here, can the residents be here, and how dangerous is it? And that was in only the places that we could reach with the monitors that we had. And then as far as outreach, I think we've discussed that, and on behalf of, I think, the city staff and my city team, very early on, we were part of it, and when I say we were part of it, we were present. But we were present, again, not as unified command, not as a PIO, and not even as a liaison. We were working with a liaison, and we did our best, again, and we learn, I think, from every incident, and things, even in this incident, have improved dramatically over the weeks that we've been here, because we have begun to be listened to, and things have occurred. Staff has changed. There's been responses. I think from Mr. Cullen today being here and saying what he has said, it's pretty clear that we had a rough first couple of weeks as your city staff trying to get the community involved and have these meetings, and let's just at least tell them what's going on. And that wasn't the fire department speaking. I'm speaking on behalf of your city, that we were trying to get information out, again, even if it was, as you stated, something that was misconceived as kind of losing its strength in community involvement. It obviously has not. So we appreciate very much your interest and your desire to have information given. And with that, that's really, those were our actions that day, as well as the actions of your city throughout that first phase of the emergency response up until the very first evening.
Senator Jackson?
Just a couple questions. Thank you. You were clearly the first responder. At some point, you essentially passed the baton off to OSPRA and PHMSA and the other entities. Were you, at that point, done with your involvement in this? Do you think, and if so, was that an appropriate end of your effort, or were you part of the unified command, and do you think that if you weren't, that you should be?
I can answer that with both. When we transferred command of the emergency response to mitigation and cleanup, we were not done where we kind of, you saw our taillights drive off and we were finished. The fire department, our hazardous materials teams, and our active, what we call offensive versus defensive, our offensive actions were basically complete to the amount that we had done everything we are capable and equipped to do. Driving away, we certainly did not leave the incident. That was part of, I think, the challenge, was we transitioned then from being a fire department representative and a first responder representative to being a city representative. And that was, I believe, some of the best way to put it is the challenge over those first 2 weeks of this incident was we transitioned into being represented by the city, and we had multiple entities. Didn't have one person committed to being there at every meeting 24/7, although there's a couple individuals in the room who basically were at every meeting for the first 7 days of this, from the 23rd to the 30th. And then over the next few weeks, we basically charged both our city communications manager and our fire marshal to be that person.
So you were the city's representative after this incident concluded, or after you transitioned from the job that you were prepared and capable of doing?
Correct. When I say, I don't want to say I as your fire chief, I think we as the city maintained involvement and communication either through the form of the city manager's office and the communications manager that's assigned to the city manager, and also through our fire marshal. Again, by default of being a first responder and also someone who represents the city manager and the city at in many different venues. And so we had a physical presence, an actual physical presence. I would deem it pretty much nonstop for the first 2 weeks, but it was during those first 2 weeks that physical presence didn't help because we were a stakeholder that represented the community unified command.
Last question. Do you feel that given your capabilities, your expertise, that you would have benefited this whole process would have benefited by your having been part of the unified command?
Standpoint, absolutely.
But that actually did not happen, or did it?
In feeling like we were being heard as to our recommendations to have a community meeting. And it's actually already been openly stated that there was we don't have all the answers, we weren't ready. And I think after it was a little bit too late, we finally got the message through that regardless of what the message is,
So
it
that's
needs
a
to
lesson
get out.
that's been learned from this event. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And just, obviously, your testimony has highlighted the communication gaps and the lack of information provided in the first couple weeks. At this point, is the city received answers to its questions from OSPRA and from the state fire marshal?
Yes, from OSPRA and the state fire marshal, with the advent of the local government advisor, and I think a lot of improved communication, staff changes. There have been people even in higher authority that have come down from both agencies. We are feeling a lot better as a city.
And what about from Crimson?
From Crimson, we've obviously requested information from Crimson as a city, again, not as the fire department, but the city of Ventura, through the city manager's office, has requested information. And the status of that, I mean, I have some information
But some is not yet been provided.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
great. Thank you.
Before we all end, I'd like just one sort of a final question, because we're about to bring Crimson up. In your opinions, was the responsible party here as responsive as you believe that they could be and should be? And if not, what could we do to try to correct that problem going forward? 30 seconds, if you could.
Oh, you guys want to handle that? I can. Again, I think I'm probably the least qualified one to say that in the sense of since we started cleaning up, you can kind of hear what we've been going through.
Sometimes I don't know is an answer.
Yeah.
It's okay to say. So I appreciate that.
I'll go with
but
that.
Mr. Cullen?
I would say based on the equipment that was brought to the scene within the first 24 hours, the amount that was covered in the first 24 hours, adherence to the requirements that we put in place, I believe that they responded appropriately and expeditiously.
And we continue to work with Crimson as part of our investigation. They have been cooperating with us in our requests. We are still awaiting some records from them that we've requested, but we feel confident that information is coming. So,
Thank you. And of course, with I don't know is, but I will find out for you. That's the second part of that important response.
Our last presentation is from Crimson, so we want to be able to have time for that. We will also have time for public comment. Those of you that fill out a slip like this, please do so if you have a question or a comment. Our presenter is Larry Alexander, the president of Crimson Pipeline.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Alexander. We good to go?
Please continue, Mr.
Okay,
Alexander.
my name's Larry Alexander. I'm president of Crimson Pipeline, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today regarding this incident. And thank you, Chairman Williams and Senator Jackson, for allowing me to come and share some of my information with you. There are likely many people, including yourselves, who have never heard of Crimson Pipeline prior to the Grove incident. But Crimson has been a member in this community for over 10 years. We work hard day in and day out to maintain the integrity and safety of the pipeline operations so that we can be a quiet neighbor known for bringing jobs and commerce to the community. We deeply regret the oil spill that has negatively impacted the community. We take full responsibility to work with the state and local officials and the affected neighbors to clean up and restore the Barranca. To date, some 43 days after the event first occurred, through the combined efforts of the Unified Command, significant progress has been made. As a participant in the Unified Command, our company goals are aligned with those of the Unified Command to remove as much oil from the environment as can be done safely without compromising three things: the stability of the Barranca in the interest of public safety, the safety of the workers, and to do this in an environmentally responsible manner. Additionally, we are aligned with the Unified Command to develop and implement remediation plans to address any unrecovered oil and restoration plans for vegetation that's been damaged during the process. While we've made significant progress, we will not rest until the job is complete. Through the Unified Command, we've gone to great lengths to assure that air quality standards are met. Since the very first days of the incident, teams have been accurately measuring and documenting the air quality in and adjacent to the Prince Barranca, as well as in the surrounding community. To date, more than $1.9 million has been spent on this rigorous effort alone. At no time has there been any air contaminants that have come anywhere close to the thresholds representing risk to human health. We continue to monitor the air quality specifically to assure homeowners that the air quality is safe. Further, to assure transparency, the Unified Command and Crimson have coordinated with the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District in this effort. We responded quickly after the discovery of the spill. First, Crimson immediately shut down the pumps on the pipeline, helping to minimize the spill, and we immediately notified the proper authorities. This allowed local responders to arrive quickly on the scene and, along with Crimson employees, construct an earthen berm which prevented oil from traveling further down the Barranca or getting close to the ocean. Rapid notification allowed the California Office of Emergency Service and the National Response Center to cascade that information to federal, state, local agencies, and other affected parties in accordance with their protocols. Next, with respect to communication, we made our best efforts to assure communications to all the stakeholders. We've adapted to the evolving request for better communications and more transparency with local residents. While there's always room to improve, I respectfully state that a full and fair understanding of our efforts will reflect that we've acted in good faith at all times. We've worked tirelessly to balance our communications with the public and with our deference to letting the public officials do their jobs. Each day is a new opportunity, and we're committed to engaging in every way reasonably possible to be transparent and to provide the most accurate information available at the time, given certain constraints such as the confidential nature of the investigation. A release of any kind is unacceptable to us. Coming out of this incident, Crimson has taken and will continue to take steps to improve upon our already strong safety record. We will incorporate lessons learned in a continuous improvement approach that keeps our people, the communities in which we work, and the environment safe during our operations. At the time of the incident, our immediate focus as a company was on making sure that people and the environment were protected, and that's the message that we focused on delivering during the first community meeting. With the protection and cleanup of the local environment now well underway, we're committing to even greater community engagement. In the spirit of improving communications, we recently participated in a meeting at the Ventura County Board of Supervisors, as well as weekly meetings with residents who live along the Barranca. We will continue these efforts to better engage with community members. Regarding the ongoing activities related to the Grove incident, Crimson will fully cooperate with the investigation of the cause of the release. When the investigation is complete, I am confident that it will be made clear that the Grove incident did not involve pipeline corrosion. We are also fully committed to supporting the Unified Command with completing the appropriate cleanup and remediation of the Barranca while being mindful of all stakeholders and minimizing any short-term disruptions to residents and the environment. We pride ourselves on being a responsible member of our community and to upholding the highest standards in environmental protection and community engagement. Additionally, we're fully committed to working within the response structure and partnering with the appropriate federal, state, and local agencies involved in the response effort. This includes close coordination in all emergency response situations that may occur in Ventura County or elsewhere. We wholeheartedly support the Unified Command's engagements with stakeholders and throughout the entire process. You and others likely have questions about the cause of the spill. The exact cause of the release is under investigation by experts and government agencies. Out of respect to those experts, we need to let them complete their work. When they release their findings, we will be able to answer questions about the cause. Ultimately, it'll be up to the state to determine what to do with that information. I'd also like to address the issue of the pipeline being placed back into service. Pipeline companies operating hazardous liquid pipelines are only permitted to reactivate a pipeline after a thorough evaluation of the pipeline's safety and the approval of a restart plan. This evaluation and approval is given by the State Fire Marshal Office of Pipeline Safety. This important protocol was absolutely adhered to following this incident. Late in the evening of June 30th, the State Fire Marshal officially authorized Crimson to resume operations. We want to assure you that all necessary inspections and authorizations were completed before moving forward and resuming operations. At no time did Crimson attempt to suppress communications regarding the restart. That being said, we own that we could have done a better job in relaying this information to the community. At no time was the integrity of the pipeline itself a concern. We believe that the Fire Marshal followed all safeguards and protocols and only allowed the restart of the pipeline when it was safe to do so. In closing, I'd like to offer a few more global thoughts. Crimson is a responsible pipeline operator. We have created and sustained many good-paying jobs in Ventura and elsewhere in the state of California. We continue to heavily invest in improving our pipelines, which are vital to the energy infrastructure of California. We are men and women who are residents of California, who, like you, call this state our home and cherish the beauty of the California landscape. We respect the need to preserve and protect those areas that are so precious to us. We're working hard to restore the community's trust. Accidents do occur, but they're never acceptable. Prevention is the key, making it the core of our business and the many regulations, rules, and ordinances that have been adopted over the years. With each new accident, new rules are debated and often adopted to hopefully prevent any such recent accident from ever happening again. Such may be the case in this instance, but I'll leave it to the elected officials to decide. History shows that the majority of oil pipeline releases and near misses are the result of third-party actions. Our efforts at prevention have too often been frustrated when a third-party contractor hits our pipeline while digging without a valid dig alert permit or otherwise acts in a manner that causes a leak or damage to a pipeline. We hope that as legislatures, you will consider this as you debate policy changes that may be needed to help minimize leaks in the future. Thank you, Chairman Williams and Senator Jackson, and let me know what questions you may have.
What is first of all, thank you for being here, and your point about dig alerts are important. It's something that the legislature has debated and looked at. What is the likely cause of the spill?
The cause of the spill is under investigation, and out of deference to that team that's looking at it, I kind of have to withhold the details of that.
But don't you have to submit a form that says what the likely cause of the spill is?
We have a obligation to report to PHMSA, but in this instance, due to the nature of the investigation that's being done, we put in the required information, but have withheld that causation information till the investigation is complete.
Because you're not confident that what was put down in the PHMSA form may be the actual cause.
It would be inappropriate for us to put that down at this time.
And has this or adjacent lines experienced other spills, ruptures, or leaks in the last, say, 10 years since you've owned the pipeline?
Yeah, I'd like to refer back to the comment I made earlier about third-party damage. We did have a release in December last year in the Somas area, and the cause of that was a utility contractor installing a electrical pole working at midnight beyond the time of its dig alert permit and drilled into our pipeline. They were clearly working with an invalid dig alert ticket, working at midnight, and they drilled right into our pipeline. And clearly that was a third-party damage event, but we did not hesitate to react, to respond, and we spent every dollar that was required to clean up that release and deal with all the follow-on issues of that.
And where is this pipeline routed in Ventura? Is it under streets or near other homes and schools?
The route of the pipeline comes over the hills, and then it does go a little bit through the community, but it follows its way down to the Wilmington area.
And can you tell us what additives were in the oil to have it be so, I guess, liquefied that the oil would flow so swiftly?
So your question in the video, that
Right.
it looked like that was free-flowing water, was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. The reality is crude oil is a term that is a generic term, but crude oil can be very different. In the Bakersfield area, and I believe offshore Santa Barbara, the oil is very heavy and is required to be heated, to be
Right.
fluid. The oil that's produced here in the Ventura Hills is what's known as a light crude. It is very thin, and it flows like water. And it's a more valuable crude than the crude that's in the Bakersfield area. And there are no additives that are being put in that crude. It's at ambient temperature. It's not heated, so it's at ground temperature. And that's just the properties of the Ventura crude that we move through the pipeline.
And do you believe, I guess this is another way of asking my first question, but do you believe the spill would have happened if the valve had been installed properly?
I think I have to just withhold making a statement on that.
We are experiencing this in this county, a severe lack of staffing of facilities and combined with an aging infrastructure as more and more of the large oil companies sell to smaller oil companies the facilities in this county and in Santa Barbara County. And does Crimson have adequate staff with the skills needed to properly maintain your infrastructure?
Let me differentiate between an oil production company and an oil pipeline company. We operate pipelines as a public utility with tariffs that are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. The destaffing of, say, Rincon Island, oil producers have seen the price of oil drop from $100 to $30 or whatever, have probably had to make changes. Our revenues are tied to tariffs that are independent of the price of oil. As a matter of fact, we have staffed up over the last several years, and we have increased the staffing and the expenditures we're doing on integrity management. And the reality is our staffs are larger now than they were 5 years ago. We're spending more money now on testing and inspection than we were doing 5 years ago. And we understand the public trust that we have as an operator of the pipeline to safely operate the pipelines and to prevent leaks. So quite the opposite. No, we are staffed up and spending more money now.
This is, I think, an important issue because both Senator Jackson and I, early in our careers, worked very hard to end the tankering of oil off our coast, successfully to end the tankering of oil off our coast in order, and the only decent alternative is pipelining. And so both of us have a stake in in pipelining as the least dangerous alternative for transport. So that's not really a question, but I want to make sure that you understand that that because of the dangers of tankering, trucking, or training oil, we have a stake in wanting to make this work better. So if we're going to ask a lot of nitpicky questions, it's going to be because we want to find out all the ways that this can be done better, not just as a gotcha. So I hope what you would be willing to do is to provide to my office and possibly to the public your information on increased staffing and updates of infrastructure, because that would be evidence that things could get better. Senator Jackson, I'm sure you have some questions.
Just a few questions. First of all, I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your efforts. We always can do better, and the fact that you had an incident in December that was not your doing is something that shouldn't happen and should be corrected, but that's not why we're here. I wonder, could you tell us when did you first learn of the spill, and what mechanisms do you have so that you would be aware immediately when there was oil that was leaking from the pipeline?
We were very fortunate in this case that a neighbor, Strat Wood, smelled that and rode his motorcycle around and made the observation and found the phone number on our sign and made the call that alerted us of that. It's often the case that boots on the ground can be much quicker to detect a leak than anything else. And we do ask that the public be aware of how to identify a pipeline markers with our sign on it. Many people don't understand what a pipeline marker looks like, but we appreciated the efforts of the public to help us to be the quickest identification of this incident.
I'm not sure that's
Okay,
great
okay.
comfort, because if this had occurred up the hill where, let's say, people didn't start hiking up there till 9 in the morning, would it have been those boots on the ground at 9 a.m. rather than at 5 o'clock that would have discovered this, or would it?
Well, that's a different hypothetical event, and to some extent, the investigation and the causation will help answer that question, because the nature of the work that was being done kind of directed how things could be learned. And so it's a little bit difficult to answer your question without diving into talking about some of the details around the investigation.
Well, all right, I'll make it a more
Can I-
generic question.
Can I ask
What-
this, Beth? Because I think the question that comes to mind that I think you're trying to get at is, why would an individual in the neighborhood notice sooner than your own leak detection technology? What kind of leak detection technology do you have?
Well, that was going to be the question. What are the mechanisms, what technology, leak technology, whatever you want to call it, do you have that would
Yes, ma'am.
be available so that we don't have to ask the public to be the one to find these leaks?
We have a control center in Long Beach, which is staffed 24 hours a day. It's a state-of-the-art control center that receives data from pumps, valves, meters. We have 2 different kinds of leak detection on our pipeline system that we would consider state-of-the-art leak detection. This project involved a maintenance activity where the pipeline had been evacuated of oil for the reinstallation of a valve, and there are conditions that during the maintenance activity that had to be considered differently. That in a normal instance, when the pipeline is flowing and full of oil, our system can rapidly detect a release and give us the opportunity to immediately shut down.
But that wasn't the case here because there had been some repair work going on.
Yes.
All right. And the last question, what safety precautions did you have in place during the period of time you were doing that repair work, that the valve was being put in and taken out, and we won't guess that it was the valve, but if I were a betting person, I might. But something certainly during the maintenance process, there is a maintenance process. What kinds of procedures, what kinds of devices do you have that would identify a leak during those periods of time when the oil isn't flowing rapidly, you don't have the pressure systems and so forth?
Those are the questions that the investigation team is asking. Those are the questions that I'm asking. We're awaiting the response from them to see the answers of exactly those kinds of questions, because we want to know so we can implement the same preventative measures in the future.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you can say to us now that you would do to prevent such incidences in the future? I mean, you've let us know that your leak detection technology does not function optimally when you are in the middle of a repair work or changeover in infrastructure. And so if this turns out to be human error, or even if it does not turn out to be human error, it's possible that the spill could have been further minimized had there been someone on site, or if there had been leak detection technology that would have noticed it. And so can you make a commitment to this community that you would have someone on site or replace or change over your leak detection technology so that when repairs and changes of infrastructure are being made, that you would have a way of knowing if there is a leak?
I'm confident that we are going to actively look for that. This was a rather unusual instance. Nevertheless, it's one that we want to see never repeated again, and I'm confident we're going to find the appropriate things that need to be done and will be done to prevent this from happening again.
I appreciate that. I think we're all very much looking forward to the investigation. Do you know when this is going to be done so that we can have answers to these questions and be able to follow, scrutinize, have accountability, assurances, confidence that in the future this kind of thing won't happen again?
I'm not certain I know the date when that's going to be released. I think Fish and Wildlife is driving the investigation.
3 months, 4 months, a week? All right, well, we may have
I believe
to...
the state fire marshal.
Oh. From now? Okay.
Did you ask about when the investigation will be completed?
When we're going to get the results? So about the beginning of the year? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I have nothing further. Thank you for being here. We do have some public comment we might want to get to.
Yeah, we will begin with the public comment. These slips are a little bit unclear. Some of them provide you the opportunity to give you comment if it's nonverbal. So we'll go through the ones that didn't write anything first because it's obvious that they wanted to speak. At this point, I would ask that you keep your comments to about 90 seconds to make sure that everybody can cycle through. And we'll start with Steve Offerman, who's a representative from Supervisor Steve Bennett. Mr. Offerman.
Thank you. Steve Offerman from County Supervisor Bennett's office. First, I would like to thank Senator Jackson and Assembly Member Williams for holding this hearing. Moreover, would like to greatly thank you for successfully authoring and passing two very important pieces of legislation that will prevent incidents like this in the future, that will greatly improve pipeline safety. That was a tremendous benefit to the state of California. Thank you very much. A lot of ground has been covered here. I think everybody who spoke has recognized that communications with the community, with the city, with local government agencies was not adequate, and that there's great room for improvement. Supervisor Bennett recognized that early on and introduced a Board of Supervisors policy letter that was heard by the board on July 19th, calling for, among other things, greater local agency involvement in the unified command, greater local agency involvement in the environmental testing, such as the air quality testing. Shortly thereafter, he was approached by Director Cullen, had a very productive meeting, and Director Cullen did create a position of local advisor in the incident unified command, which the City of Ventura Fire Department filled. And so communications have been greatly improved, and that's a model for going forward. Our County Office of Emergency Services and the Sheriff's Department has convened an oil spill task force to look at how we can better coordinate local communication and local participation in the unified command going forward. Clearly, this was a preventable accident. This was a preventable accident that was entirely under Crimson's control. This was not an errant backhoe driver. This was a line that was restarted in the middle of the night, that was put under pressure, restarted without leak detection procedures in place, without staff in place, and we're very fortunate that a light sleeping local resident was able to play Paul Revere and save us from a much greater accident. So really everybody recognizes that there are severe shortcomings here. And we should also recognize that this has caused a grave upset to the neighbors of the pipeline, neighbors of the Barranca there. A lot of anguish, a lot of unnecessary anxiety, concerns for their homes, concerns for their property. I think all of those concerns were not adequately incorporated in the initial communication and response, and I certainly hope they are going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Offerman. Janet Murphy, who will be followed by Margaret Davis. And if you could, just so that this goes fast, if you're the next person up, try to get close by.
Janet Murphy, thank you for asking the tough questions I didn't even think of, and for all the first responders, excellent job. I appreciate their help in these type of situations. I really appreciate when you said about our infrastructures, because this will happen again. That's the sad part. We know that, us activists. I'm a citizen activist. I don't want to see this happen again, but I am very thankful that you're here and getting the ball rolling, and it encourages me to take more action with my people that represent me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret or Margot Davis with Climate Hub.
Margot.
Margot.
You look like a Margot.
Followed by Greg Stefane.
Thank you for having the hearing. My name is Margot Davis, and listening to the evidence that we've heard today, I was thinking, I kind of made my notes as we went along, and I was thinking that we heard about 4 facts, but then after Crimson came up, Crimson sort of threw one in doubt, but what I got was the first fact is that we have an aging pipeline installed in 1940. Okay, the second fact, we don't know whether or not corrosive materials were added to the crude oil that would complicate the problem. Crimson says no, but that's not determined yet. Okay, the third fact is that the investigation of the cause and the safety of the public is not complete and will not be complete for at least 4 months. The fourth fact is that the pipeline is operating. Now, I have 3 questions. The first question is, should the fire marshal have authorized it to restart? The second question is, since it's restarted and it's operating, is this a hazard to public safety? And the third question is, ask ourselves, why was it restarted so quickly? And the last thing I want to say is this. For the next 4 or 5 months, however long it is it takes to get the answers, almost every answer that was given here was said, well, we don't know because we're still investigating. We don't know because we don't know the cause. We can't answer that. Okay, all of that is up in the air. I think that until this pipeline has been officially certified as spill-proof and 100% safe, it should be shut down. And it can be shut down, because my understanding is that the city attorney has an authority to file a preliminary injunction and get a court order and shut it down until it's proven safe.
Thank you. Greg Stefane, followed by Bob Poole.
Good afternoon, Senator Jackson, Assemblymember Williams. My name is Greg Stefane, and I represent the Coastal Energy Alliance. Our coalition represents community members, those that work and support all methods of energy production in the region. I'd like to make quick 3 points. One, we first like to appreciate the hard work of the responders that have been working around the clock to clean the oil spill around the region. Second, our coalition supports the points made by Mr. Colin in the VC Star last week. We're behind the federal, state, and local agencies that are working at the Unified Command, working on this process. We believe public health should remain at the top priority, and we stand behind their process that they're going about. Lastly, and most important, we support domestic energy production in the region, and we hope that the conversations that have happened today will continue to create policy for safe energy production throughout the state. Thank you so much.
Bob Poole, followed by Christine Samusik, maybe? Hope I'm not slaughtering your name.
Good afternoon, Senator Jackson, Assemblymember Williams. My name is Bob Poole. I am with the Western States Petroleum Association. I represent industry. I'm also a Ventura County resident. And I want to echo industry's commitment to continuing to provide the safest transportation of energy we can. I was heartened to hear the acknowledgement that we do need this energy, and would also like to reinforce the point that, as I believe I've spoken to both of you in previous venues, that California uses almost 2 million barrels of oil a day, every day, 40 million gallons of gasoline. We get over 60% of that overseas from tankers. And we have lots of oil here that we can produce and transport in those pipelines. So I would just ask that as you go forward, in addition to maintaining the safety concerns, that realize that it is the best option for us. And I would also underscore that we've been working very closely with the county in their response with the grand jury report relative to pipeline safety in Ventura County, and we've supported Supervisor Bennett in his initiatives for transparency, more local involvement, et cetera, and we are committed to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. And just to be very clear, at least from my perspective, I won't try to speak for Assemblymember Williams.
Oh, no,
you
can do it.
We are also committed to seeing us reduce, if not end, our dependence on oil by finding ways to use renewable energy sources. And I must say that it's almost like being hoisted on our own petard here. We do need that oil while we're trying to get off that oil, but I can tell you the oil companies are doing everything they can to make sure that we don't get off that oil. So I just want to... As we battle SB 32 this year and efforts of SB 350 that Assemblymember Williams was very, very prominently involved in last year and could not defeat the efforts by the oil industry to keep us dependent upon oil. I do appreciate what you're saying, but I do think it's important that we note that part of the problem is that the oil industry is not with us in this effort. So I did feel compelled to say that. I apologize for taking more time than necessary.
I will echo your comments in this. You know, every time, one of my staff writes something in a press release that says, we're going to pass this bill or do X, Y, Z to make sure that this never happens again, I X that out. And there's a reason why I X that out. It's because none of us honestly can say, even if Senator Jackson and I are successful in getting commitments from the operator or in tightening pipeline safety laws, we can never say it won't happen again. Our society's oil dependence means oil spills will continue to happen. Mm-hmm. And so, all of the things that we are doing today obviously are important and small, but the big thing is we probably should all be doing everything we can to use less oil so that we can have a safer community. I'm going to turn over.
Do you have
We have Christine, and then we have another bunch of names. If you didn't want to speak and you just wanted to put a written comment, you can just not come up, and we'll keep on calling names.
I just wanted to ask a really important question to me. My name's Christine Samusik. I'm a retired nurse and West Side resident and homeowner. It wasn't addressed, but there's 25,000 gallons of oil missing. And where is this oil? Has it gone into our water table? Is our water table being monitored? Has it destroyed our environment completely? What is this oil doing? And how is our water being monitored? Is our water table being monitored by someone?
fair? I think that's a very fair question. Do you have a response to that? Is it being monitored by OSPRA? They're still looking for the oil, so they can't answer the question until they find the oil.
Is our water table being looked at? Has it been
Is the aquifer being looked at to make sure that the oil hasn't, that you are working with the water? Okay, so there is an effort with the water, Regional Water Quality Control Board to determine whether there's been any impact.
Because that water, the water, I know we haven't had any rain, but when the rains come again, if they come, that oil is just going to drain right into, I know that there's wells on the avenue that go into, that we drink.
Well,
They get
hopefully we'll
processed
have
and
an
we
answer
drink.
by then, and
Thank
very
you.
hopefully it won't be, the answer will be that, no, it isn't seeping into the aquifer. But the faster we can get that information, I think the more important it is, and the public really needs to know. I think that's a very fair question. So we have Hennig Otson. Hennig has a comment, need to have local voices part of the decision on what will be done in Barranca. Do you need to say anything further on that?
I'd like to mention a little more about that.
Certainly.
If you can. I mean, you mentioned my Henning Otson. I live on Grove Lane. Linda and I are right there where the spill started. It came right down onto our property as it came across Hall Canyon Road. The emergency response was great. You guys did a great job, got in there quickly and got it done. Thank you for doing that. That's a great thing to stop this from getting any worse. The concern I have is moving forward on what we're going to do from here. And the Unified Command is advised by probably 15 or 20 stakeholders that now includes the Fire Marshal. And that advice covers everything: air, water, animals, waste mitigation, cultural resources, all good stuff that needs to be dealt with. The problem is that the property owners that are impacted are nowhere part of that decision. And so what we need to do is, I mean, there are going to be some decisions made here based on those reports that come in on what can be done and what this endpoint is, what is clean. And you brought that up earlier. And we would certainly like to have a voice in that, not just communication. Communication is going great. We're having daily updates to our neighborhood community. We met last night with Crimson and OSPRA. And so the communication is great, but we have to be involved, I think, in the things that impact us directly. Like, what are you going to do to my barranca, and what is the thing that I need to sign off on as clean? So we need to be part of that decision.
Good
okay?
points. Thank you. Helen Conley with Sea Frog. Helen, would you like to come up? Is Helen still here? And the next person is Bob Chinese. Do I have that right? After Helen. You'll correct me, I'm sure.
Thank you, Senator Jackson and Assemblyman Williams. Thank you very much. My name's Helen Conley. I'm with an organization here in Ventura County called Sea Frog, Citizens for Responsible Oil and Gas. The operative word in our title is responsible. I'd like to remind you all that we have speaking here. Thank you, Mr. Poole, for identifying who you are. We know that you work for the WSPA organization, and we welcome your comments. We do know how much money you spend in Sacramento. You people need to be aware of how much leverage is put on our legislators up there. great deal. They spend more money than anybody else. There is another young man here who works for an organization. His name is Greg, a nice young man. He works for a spin-off of OSPRA. He's paid to come and talk to you all about how wonderful oil and gas projects are. So I am not paid by anybody. I am part of a volunteer watchdog organization. We monitor particularly permits. I have just 2 comments to make about what I heard today. And the first one is, what would the standard of service and equipment, their age and condition be to bring us, that is the legislature and companies who regulate this, to the conclusion that these pipelines must be replaced or repaired? Because it's true, we are going to have pipelines for the foreseeable future. Then the second comment I have is, how does the Crimson Pipeline Company liability and insurance coverage impact the results of reports and public statements as to the cause of this spill? Seafrog has been involved with some litigation, and we've been involved with regulators. There's always a fourth estate, if you will, the insurance company. And they're weighing in on all of these people, the fire, the first responders, the company, and everybody else. So they have an impact on whether or not they're going to pay out. So the information you may not be getting may be logged up in some of that kind of folderol, to be honest. And so we need to be able to have some certainty about this. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming out. This is a really important issue. We usually are talking to the county. We'll have 2 suits against the county of Ventura for oil operations here. So this is a long-term process, folks. Get ready to be involved for a long time. Make sure that you elect the right representatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would be willing to bet that Crimson has already touched base with their insurance company. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Hannah Beth Jackson and Doss Williams, for coming. It's very important. We're very engaged in this. I have 3 simple points. One is we still haven't heard about the status of the city manager, Mark Watkins' subpoena of information from Crimson about this material. I mean, this would tend to answer a lot of questions. Maybe it's held up as well. We haven't heard from that. The second point is that we formed a little organization of an organization of people who are right by the Barranca. We call it VOSN, Ventura Oil Spill Neighbors. And we have been able, working with the Unified Command and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to have informationals come out every day about what process is going on in the Barranca, which helps us to figure out, why are these trucks here today and not tomorrow? What's going on down in there? Most of us can't see down there, by the way. And the problem is that the Unified Command doesn't want us to circulate those very useful, hardly confidential updates to anywhere beyond our little group. This would be a very, very, very good advantage for the community to receive them. The last thing is, I want to talk about why this thing was started up because of a specific reason. Now, this is something we heard early on. I don't think we're talking about pipelines. We're talking about this pipeline. It's a 10-inch small line there since 1941. Our house was in place before it was put there. The question, I remember someone saying it had to be started up right away because there are strategic reasons why that pipeline needs to be flowing with oil. Strategic. Is this going to help us defeat ISIS? Is that the point? What is the strategic issue here? Obviously, the oil company and the pipeline company need to make
I'd say no, we'd have an easier time defeating ISIS if we didn't buy any oil. But
you know, I think that's an important question, because it was that kind of was the impetus for starting it right up again. It should have been suspended for about at least until the report came back about what its cause was. I mean, who else would start up something when you, quote, officially didn't know the cause?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we inquire as to whether there is any definition of strategic that I assume it has nothing to do with ISIS, but is there any explanation as to or definition of what strategic is as the basis upon which the pipeline was restarted? Is it? That may be. Is the fire marshal here? So I had to. Okay, thank you. All right, we've got just a few more minutes. Very good question.
We will extend that question to
Yes.
the fire marshal.
Yes.
I believe the fire marshal had to leave to go catch a flight at Burbank.
So we have John Golson followed by Allison Carlson. John Golson.
Thank you.
Sure.
Gosh, this is tragic, isn't it? It's just tragic. I think about these things and I look at them. I can remember being 9 years old and becoming a member of an organization called GOO, Get Oil Out. And it was because our coast was completely inundated by oil. And I look at that, and then I look at a situation like this, which is comparatively small. But haven't we reached a place now? I mean, let's think about this really and seriously and honestly. We need to be gut-wrenchingly honest with ourselves. Haven't we reached a point where there's not an acceptable risk anymore? It doesn't exist. It's an illusion. So I think I would join with a number of people in this room, and I realize it's kind of an extreme request, but Senator, Assemblyman, you know, please, can we put some incentives into place? Can we put some situations into place where it will encourage people like me and all these folks to seriously cut down on petroleum-based product use, and for oil companies to begin to move their incredibly great strength. This is a powerful resource. They have the power to be able to cut themselves down even while they invest in future infrastructure. How can we encourage that? That's what I would ask. So,
thank you very much for your question.
Allison Carlson, I'm one of the neighbors, and thank you both for coming. First of all, does anybody, any agency in the state or local actually know where all these pipes are that are underneath Ventura? Are there actual maps and you all know? Because I've heard things like, well, nobody really knows where things are under there, but if we know, then that's good, then I can move on. Okay. Well, that seems ridiculous to me, and really...
That's a good question for the fire marshal that has these responsibilities. I have a feeling that we know at least a good number of them. Are they all available to the public?
There is, I believe, on the state fire marshal's website. I'm the city fire marshal, but there is on the state fire marshal website. I believe there's a map showing where the pipelines are.
Okay, so go to the state fire marshal's website for the pipelines. I'm not sure if it's all of them, but that's a good question, and we will further inquire. Thank you.
Okay, the next thing is about this issue of notice of the leak and the fact that Crimson had no idea there was a leak until a citizen brought it up. And then, actually, I could not believe that you actually said that you rely on boots on the ground. I wish somebody had told all of us boots that we're being relied on to report for oil spills and stuff. I thought that was crazy. And I think that if anybody who runs hazardous materials through pipelines, if they can't have a system reliable to let them know immediately when there's a breach of that system, they shouldn't be running that stuff under there. That to me is crazy. The last thing I want to talk about is the remaining oil, the 25,000 or whatever that's remaining that they don't really know if it's there or not. I can see this coming down to, oh, well, we really can't do anything about it because there's neighborhoods and we don't want to destabilize the hillside and the houses, so we're just going to have to bury it. We're just going to have to leave it there, and all of a sudden we're going to have our own little love canal right there down Hall Canyon. And that to me is unacceptable, and I don't want to see that happen. And I'm really entrusting you guys to make sure that that does not happen to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Lamar, and the last, is Audra Lucas here? You don't want to speak? Okay. Elizabeth Lamar, are you still present? You're Elizabeth, and you don't want to speak. Okay, Elizabeth with the Sierra Club, and Audra Lucas, are you here? All right, I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Assembly member?
If there is someone that didn't fill out a slip that wants to, at the very last, neglected to, please do so quickly. And, I know that many of you have been patient, going well over the amount of time. Please, Rachel?
Sorry, I don't know where my slip went. My name is Rachel Morris, and I've worked for about 10 years to deal with the climate crisis. And so it's really great to have a couple of heroes here that have been working hard on that. It's just so disturbing when we have so many great things we could be doing with our time and resources to keep hearing about one spill after another. And I don't even know how much money this is going to be that could be going into clean energy, and it's going into this instead. And also I had the big question along with another person about what's going on with the watershed. It's just north of a high school, yada, yada, yada. So I just wanted to bring up that I just got back from Cuba, and the reason I went to Cuba is because I know they had an oil embargo. And I went and I spoke with the mayor of Havana, and I spoke with a couple of colonels from their military to see how they quickly responded to not having oil. And what they did was they made an agreement with China, and they got 1.7 million bicycles in there, and people turned on the dime, and in like 1 year they were like dealing with not having oil by using bicycles. I'm not saying that's what we need to do, although, you know, I love bicycles. But what I am saying is it's about vision, and it's about understanding it's really, really is doable to get off oil. And we've got a whole nation over there that did it. And if we have any questions, they're inviting, us to go talk with them. I got invited back to do a talk and a presentation on bicycles. So if there's ever a question, do we want something better than dirty oil? The answer is yes. But the bigger thing is, can we do it? Heck, it's already been done. It's already been done. Thank you.
Are you Francisco?
I am.
My apologies, I
That's okay.
missed those last two
I
ones.
think a youth voice would be appropriate in this space. Good afternoon, Senator, Assembly Member, my fellow community members. My name is Francisco. I'm a citizen of Oxnard, a city which faces ever-present environmental injustices in the form of extreme energy projects. Specifically, we have 3 natural gas-fired power plants in our city, with the 4th one being proposed as we speak. Yeah, so I first wanted to thank you two on your climate action, specifically you, Assemblymember Williams, for introducing your resolution to urge Congress to act on a carbon tax. I think it's a great thing that we're doing. I think California already is a global leader in sustainable energy, but we could be doing so much more. In fact, we have a duty to be doing so much more. So I think at this point it's really a people versus corporations, specifically fossil fuel corporations at this point, and we definitely have the people power to get to that next level. So I wanted to mention the fact that Crimson Pipeline said that once they receive the report that their operations are safe, that's when they're going to begin operations again. So I just want to make it clear that fossil fuels will never be safe, right? So yeah, fossil fuels will never be safe. They poison our air, pollute our atmosphere, acidify our oceans. So I think we need to be transitioning to renewable energy as fast as possible. So not only is this climate crisis a crisis, but it's also a wonderful opportunity to really transform our society and just create countless jobs. So climate scientists are calling these moments right now decade zero. And we really have to act now, because the decisions that we make in these next few years will not only affect the quality of our lives, but the lives of our children yet unborn. So again, thank you for being here today, and I just really want to stress that we need aggressive climate action now. Thank you.
Well, we have one more, okay?
I'm Jeannie. And
Last but not least.
Okay. And I wanted to bring up also the idea of Shell Oil, who was given in January 2015, was given a year to get rid of their old refinery by our river. The first 6 months went very well. It hasn't been touched since then, and we're well into past that year. I'm wondering if the city of Ventura or county could find them like, $500,000 a week or something like that until they get it cleaned up. Because we need some money for our town too, and that's an eyesore, and it's going right into our river, and we all want it out of there.
I
It's
think
been
that's a
closed
question.
since 1982.
I think that's a good question for the city. Obviously, and I appreciate your comments, and I'm going to sort of start the close. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you for the work that you have done on addressing the spill. I want to thank Crimson for being here. I think, Crimson, you've heard this, the message from this community. It's very passionate, I think very clear. If you are to be a good steward, you have to hear what these people are saying, and I hope that that is the case. I will be positive in my thinking. To those who are directly downstream in the Barranca and the neighborhood, I urge you to continue to demand a seat at this table. You can do it. It can be done either collaboratively or legally. I know that a couple of the folks here who are neighbors are lawyers, so they know exactly what is possible. Hopefully this will be done in the spirit of collaboration, that this can be cleaned up, that the public, I think, as important as anything about this, can be assured and have local and individual minds put to rest that this oil is not polluting the aquifer and the future of this community. I think that is probably number one. Number two, I suspect, is putting things back together so that there will be no remembrance of this event going forward. And I think third, as a member of the legislature, is not only to ask whether or not the systems and the laws that we put into place are working, but what, if anything, can we do going forward to make sure, to the best of our ability, that this does not happen again? You know, we have an old expression that it's always easier to ask forgiveness than it is to ask permission. And I kind of feel the same way when it comes to these issues. It's really important that we not be having to ask forgiveness. It is really important that we don't see further events like this, that we become really responsible and responsive in asking. This may not have been a pipeline incident, but we do know that the infrastructure is eroding and corroding. We do know that it is old. It's not just the oil infrastructure. It's all our infrastructure, whether it's our roads and bridges. And we have got to take a very strong affirmative step to do everything we can to correct that situation. That means all of us coming together, working together. And so I am always thrilled to work with this wonderful community that I love and have been a member of for 35, 40 years. I shouldn't admit it, but I do appreciate what you do here, and I appreciate your commitment to the environment and to our resources and to our quality of life. That's why you're here, and my commitment to you is to do everything I can to assure that it is a wholesome and good future and a good present for all. So I look forward to continuing to work with you on these issues. I have gotten emails from most of you, so I know you know my email, and please let me know, keep me informed. I will reach out. I appreciate that the city was here, the county was here, that we have locally elected officials present. They understand this, but most of all, you understand this, and your presence is the key. So with that, I thank you for being here and want to pass along to the chair of the Natural Resources Committee for his comments.
Thank you, Senator. And I should have probably said this at the beginning, that when we do these hearings, we do this early enough where not all of the questions are possible to be answered. And we do that for a reason, because we don't want you to sit there for 4 or 5 or 6 months wondering what is going on. And so it can be frustrating that not all the answers are there. But I do think that there's some important ones that still need to be made known. Obviously, the cause of the spill and what steps can be made to reduce the likelihood of that happening to this line and other lines. The blind spot of that, at least for a period of time after equipment replacement, that some lines are invisible, so to say, that leaks are not detectable. That's a big issue. That's a big issue and must be addressed. And neighborhood input. The recovery of the amount of oil, obviously a lot of that oil is in the contaminated soil, 40, 20-yard bins, but we don't yet know how much of the other 25,000 gallons is in that contaminated soil. And I would say the mention of neighborhood involvement. This becomes especially important once the responsible amount of money for the responsible party is determined, right? What does that money go to? Does it go to mitigation of the site itself, or what other purposes? So there needs to be continued community involvement, and both Senator Jackson and my office, we want to facilitate that. We both have locally based offices, and maybe our staff that are local could raise their hands because raise them high. Don't be shy, because we want to help facilitate that involvement. And then the last thing I guess is the deeper philosophical. A lot of our history in Ventura and Santa Barbara County is intertwined with the oil industry, and I recognize that, and I don't want to deny that. They have provided jobs for our people in the past and continue to do so. That being said, it is my sincere hope seeing this happen over and over again throughout my life and my parents' and grandparents' lives living in Ventura and Santa Barbara County, that it not be in our grandchildren and great-grandchildren's future, that this is something that should embolden us to permit renewable energy facilities in this county and in Santa Barbara County, and also to make every individual attempt that we can do. I always take to local junior highs and high schools where I give talks, a question out there. I ask people, who funds ISIS? And it's a great question to ask high school students because they always want to know, right? And I go, you do. Pull out from your wallet those dollars, and a percentage, of that goes to Salafist families, and percentage of those Salafist families donate to ISIS, right? And in what kind of world do we put money into our enemy, right? In what kind of logic do we do things like that? And in what kind of logic do we continue to buy things that can poison our own community? And it to me, that we're all part of that. We're all addicted to it. But that doesn't mean to be defeatist. That means to do everything we can to wean ourselves off of that addiction. I'll also take the liberty that, because I'm termed out of office as your state legislator, I just want to tell you what an honor it has been to represent the city of Ventura. I love this community. My family has had deep roots in Ventura County and on the Avenue, and I love this community. I will continue as a Santa Barbara supervisor this coming January to be interested and want to help in this community. I'll continue to surf in this community, and I want to tell you that whatever my capacity and whether people here can vote for me or not, I want to be engaged and interested and continue to help. And with that, thank you for the honor of serving this community for 6 years.